of ways, a long wish list of ways in which to improve representative democracy in Malaysia. For example, I could suggest undoing the distortions the 60 years of gerrymandering has wreaked upon electoral constituencies. I could suggest dismantling the party system where all our elected MPs have been transformed into completely unthinking voting robots by the party system, by the party whip, by the party president, to impose the Prime Minister's often selfish agenda upon them, and through them, upon us. I could even suggest party whips be banned, and all votes by MPs must be based on conscience. I could suggest banning all political parties, in fact, which restrict membership being based on race or religion. I could suggest simplifying the voting rights by removing voter pre-registration and automatically giving all citizens above 18 the right to vote and using only their IC cards as proof of eligibility. Although that might be interesting, it would be an exercise in futility, as nothing as usual will be done by anybody to implement my suggestions. Instead, I would like to focus on just one action point. I'm one that always preferred to actually do rather than just to talk. What I'm going to propose is something that you can implement right away to force the MP or the ADUN you have voted into parliament to start representing only you and your constituency. I suggest the following simple steps to make your ADUN and your MP more accountable to you and to the people in your constituency and not to his party. Very simple. Okay, step one. Go to the election office. I mean, let's talk about one constituency, the constituency of Bukit Gasing, to which I belong. I mean, go to the election office, get an extract of the election rolls, which contains a list of all voters registered in your constituency. And then start a WhatsApp group or a WeChat group of all your fellow constituents, plus your MB and your ADUN. Now then, we use that WAG or the WhatsApp group to make a list of what we want our MP and our ADUNs to bring up to Parliament on our behalf. This becomes his job description, his targets, and the basis of all decisions that he makes in Parliament on our behalf. Okay? Then we establish milestones within that WhatsApp group and key performance indicators to measure and track his performance. Then we have a quarterly assessment of our MP's record or report card of where he has failed to bring our voices to Parliament. We punish him by telling all members in the WAG and WeChat group not to vote for him in the next elections if we detect dishonesty, corruption, low morality, low integrity, low honor, selfishness, and non-achievement of our targets. Voila, in one fell swoop. You have a mechanism for monitoring and controlling the conduct of your member of parliaments and your ADUNs. You can implement this immediately. There is no rocket science involved. Yeah, but will you do it? Or do you have a better idea to bell the cat? So that basically is what I have proposed. You know, I don't want to list down the list of things which are not right, the Parliament and all that, because this is all hot air. We'll just be talking about it. And when we go back, we have said our piece, and then we sleep it off, and nothing happens. This is something that you can do, because we should use social media actually to establish control over our parliamentarians. No need to, change the law and that sort of thing. Straight away after this, we should get, all our, especially our Budak boys, our OPs, in our own constituency. We start this WhatsApp group, get the electoral rolls, and start making our MPs accountable. They listen to us. We give them a list. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Yusuf. I think that's a good point from which to start our 10-minute discussion on your proposal, which is as close as we can get, you feel, to direct democracy representation, direct representative democracy, which is a very interesting point, without any changes in legislation, but bringing about change through accountability via social media. Yeah. Yes, I don't see, and then of course, Sapari, the OP Sapari had brought up matters relating to the present situation in Parliament. You know how it is stymied, from being effective. Although I would like to start before we come back to you, OP Yusuf, before we come back to you, to your very interesting points, your avoidance of all the things that people have been talking about, really, ad nauseum, about what to do and legal change, we'll come back to you. But I'd like to ask OP Sapari, however, when he says, the whole Parliament, he made two essential points. Dewan Rakyat is like a pasar malam, okay? A lot of shouting and posturing and whatnot. Why is it like a pasar malam? Is it the fault of the MPs? Is it the fault of the speaker? Whoever's supposed to be controlling the meeting. He can always turn them off, he does turn off microphone. So macam mana? Jadi macam pasar malam. And the second point he says, which I agree with, but I don't know what others have, views others have. He says, Dewan Negara has become a rubber stamp. There's no quality in its debate. And although it is better in terms of the conduct of its debates, it's better than the lower house, and therefore it should be used, I suppose, to be more than a rubber stamp. But coming back to the question, OP Sapari, why is it like the pasar malam?
Thank you very much, Tan Sri. Maybe, yeah, people may joke of our Dewan Rakyats. One thing, I don't know, Tan Sri is here also. He's the speaker of the Dewan Rakyat was before. I think the way the debate shouldn't. I mean, the quality of the MPs, they should shame whatever they behave in the Parliament. People make joke on their acts in the Parliament. I don't know whether it's a popular approach or what. Their approach in the Parliament, the way they behave, shoutings, the cruel words. It shouldn't show for the leader, so that behave in the House. Okay, for the second question, I think because the member of the Senate is appointed by the party, it seems like a reward to the party who support the Prime Minister. So they can't say anything to the executive because they are appointed, and their terms are only 3 years. They're scared to voice up. They worry about their terms can be expired easily in 3 years. I saw in Canada, their term 7 years, and they had the freedom to say anything. And the Prime Minister of Canada upgrade the upper house to give views on their discussion. I think the selection method is shorten the period from 6 years to 3 years, and it's like a reward to the supporters. That's why the member of the Senate can't say anything to their executive, to their boss. Maybe because of this, the quality of the debate, and just rubber stamp whatever they submit from the lower house.
Okay.
That's why, the selection of the upper house must through elections, because all countries, they have election for the upper house, even Indonesia. So these are few reforms that we have to introduce to our system. I think we can make a document as our reform agenda proposed by our OPs to make sure our members understand this is our this agenda, this is our contribution to the country by the
Okay.
OPs.
All right. Thank you. I mean, you essentially two things you're saying. One is the feudalistic sucking up to the leader tendency. Okay. And the fear of losing position and post. Okay. Essentially, kind of a whole feudalistic ecosystem that causes this kind of inability to have quality and to think independently, to be professional. Okay, that's your first point. Yeah? And your second point is there should be elections to the upper house. Upper house, therefore, should be elected. And because if they're elected, they'll be less scared of being booted out, by the appointer to their position. However, we come back to the lower house, and I'd like to bring in Yusuf now. We come back to the lower house, which is elected. So if you're elected, will you not fall into the same kind of trap or the same kind of malaise, that we find in the lower house? What would be different in the upper house that is not now already happening in the lower house? And therefore, and it is admitted that all these things happen in the lower house, and it will therefore sort of contaminate and be a characteristic of the upper house as well. So end of story, not much change. We make all these adjustments to have elections to the upper house, but not much change because of the structure of our mindset and of our political system and political party system. And therefore we come to Yusuf's very interesting point about direct accountability, using social media to press the representatives, the MPs, make them accountable, express unhappiness about certain things they have done or not done. But I would like to ask OP Yusuf, how would this work? Would you need a leader of the WAG? Would it mean that the MP would particularly be bothered? I mean, he's talking about, sort of social pressure. How would the MP respond, you think, to the kinds of direct representation that you propose? OP Yusuf?
Thank you. I think it's quite simple. The moment you have a WhatsApp group of 30,000 electoral constituents within a WhatsApp group, and this guy is a member there, we can tell him what we want him to say or to do, and we can watch his performance in Parliament. If he behaves like a monkey, then we tell him he's behaving like a monkey. And because of this collection of all these constituents, the electorate within one WhatsApp group, or you can have two WhatsApp group or three, in fact, you can actually, beat the system by sort of getting everybody there to agree that he's not performing, and then vote him out at the next, election. And of course, it could also be used for another purpose, and that is to identify your next MP. Yeah. Say, for example, if I'm a fan of people like Yobin and Nurul Izzah and all that, So if, for example, we want them to be our representative, even if they're not yet in Parliament, then we can sort of propose them at the next GE. Damn the party system, all the electorate are all inside here, and from there you can gauge what is the propensity for the people in the WhatsApp group to vote him in. You overstep the party mechanism, and one fell swoop. You can actually get over the tremendous grip that some political parties have got on their constituents. And I foresee this problem only in the rural areas where there is no social media access. Well, if that is the case, then political parties or the constituents of that political party or people like us who are interested in seeing a more responsible representation in Parliament, we collect money and put up a tower within a rural constituency that does not have internet, and we give free phones.
Okay, thank you. I think very interesting. We'll come back to you, no doubt, when we have the open discussion, because there'll be interesting issues that will arise. We've spent 10 minutes on the Q&A. Thank you for your two interventions, OP Sapari and OP Yusuf. Now I'd like to introduce OP Arif Yusuf, and I'm going to put a rather pointed question to him. Yeah. Has the present speaker of the Dewan Rakyat, can you hear me, everyone? Okay. Has the present speaker of the Dewan Rakyat been obstructionist in the reconvening of Parliament, and is not the federal constitution superior to the standing orders of the House? And if you were Speaker, OP Arif, how would you handle it? Okay, over to you.
Arif, you need to unmute.
Unmute, Arif.
Arif, unmute.
Arif, please unmute.
Arif, we can't
Okay,
hear you.
right. Okay.
Okay, now.
Difficult question. A speaker has a lot of powers. Point is, he does not have, given the present rules governing the powers of the speaker and even the constitution. He is elected by the House, no doubt, by the Dewan Rakyat if he's the speaker of the Dewan Rakyat, and by the Senate if he is the president of the Senate. Now, of course, the speaker has some element of discretion, where in certain situations, he can perhaps exercise that discretion to promote all those values that we want, proper parliamentary democracy and so on and so forth. But the problem is, you take the situation where the government of the day can decide the order of business. Once they do that, the speaker has got no say, because he's also bound by the rules. No doubt, the standing orders are standing orders, they're subsidiary legislation, but they stem from a constitutional provision. It is through the constitution that the standing orders are passed. So we have a merger of constitutional rules and rules made pursuant to a constitutional provision. But of course, constitution supersedes standing orders. It's the theory. But the reality is, who's going to challenge it? The case has been brought only barely 2 years ago, years over 1 year, when someone or two persons challenged the half-day sitting of the Dewan Rakyat. And what did the court say? High Court, here. Under Article 63 of the Federal Constitution, the proceedings of the House cannot be challenged on any ground whatsoever in the courts of law. So we are stuck. So I think whether we like it or not, there will have to be some structural changes, some changes in the law and in the standing orders, which is not something impossible to do. We can do it. Take my own experience. And this is a matter of discussion. I get blamed, I get condemned, I get praised for it as well. When the Prime Minister asked me to convene a special sitting of Parliament, I said no. Because what you're asking me does not accord with the standing orders that I know as a speaker. But that much I can say as a speaker. And I think that much the present speaker can say. But my criticism of this present speaker is not so much on these powers which are pretty standard, and they existed during my time and are still, the relevant rules. But as a speaker, you have to be impartial. You cannot side with the executive. The speaker is the speaker of the whole House, for heaven's sake. I got to tell him. He or she must be impartial. You cannot protect a minister. You cannot, suggest an answer to a minister. You can't do that. This is where, you know, he has actually not followed not only the rules, but the conventions of speakership. Of course, you know, underlying all this, we've been asking the question really, what's wrong with Parliament? You know, what's wrong with the House of, with the Dewan Rakyat? What's wrong with the Senate? You know, what's wrong with the judiciary? What's wrong with the parliamentary democracy? I think we have to phrase it a bit. And I think this is perhaps where Yusuf came from just now. We have to ask, what's wrong with us? What's wrong with me? You know, we have the bunch of jokers who create the problems in the House. And I must say it applies both ways. In Dewan Rakyat, we see a lot more. But in Dewan Negara, we're beginning to see quite a few who behave as if they are in the Dewan Rakyat. That's quite bad, you know. But the point I'm trying to make really is, we put them there. You know, we put the jokers there through the political setup, no doubt. But there are many of us, and I dare say OPs included, you know, who will blindly follow or will blindly toe the party line, come what may. This is where I think things have to change in terms of political culture, perceptions. And I don't talk about Melayu Islam sort of government, whatever, and you have to support come what may, and then you elect someone who's really not qualified to be on the floor of the House, spewing, you know, nonsense and racism and so on and so forth. But having said all that, and listening to Munir's, you know, flashback to the 1960s, of course, both of us were there in Parliament, seeing how parliamentarians behave extremely well. There was also some behavior those days, but those days, they sat only, you know, for half a day, very short sitting hours, and people were generally well behaved because they understood the system. And we had, you know, a prime minister, well, 2 prime ministers at least, I can say, or 3, who were statesmen, who knew what Parliament stood for. But things have changed since then. You know, those in executive are no longer, you know, the kind of statesmen with statesman-like qualities. No, they also tend to toe the party line, which is where we are now. It's a mess, a total mess. But I wouldn't say, you know, aside from the, you know, what is obvious, all is not well with our parliamentary democracy. The way I see it, we're not looking at a total erosion. I still have my hope, you know. We're looking at an erosion, not so much an erosion, sorry. We're talking about a decay in the system. You know, willy-nilly, we have allowed that decay to happen through a number of reasons. You know, the institutions are there. Fine, the Parliament House is there on top of the hill, nice, you know. We have the usual ceremonies and the forms of procedure is fine, question time, ministers' question time, and what have you, they are there. But the spirit is not there. Why? You know, why? But I am a bit of a, you know, optimist here. I don't think it's all that bad. There are a handful of fellas. You can actually draw up the list of the bad ones. But there are equally good ones. You know, Yusuf has named one. There are plenty of good ones and plenty of good young ones. The ladies as well. You know, and when they speak, when they debate, they make a lot of sense. But quite often, they are, you know, overridden by the noise by the others who are not so good. I mean, I'm trying to be kind, you know. Those who are not so good, who are put there through the party system. So then you got to ask the Prime Minister, you know, why are you allowing such people to be there, to represent your party? Something must be wrong. You know, we make all the changes that we want, but it falters when it comes to selection by the parties. And they tolerate these people, you know, to no end. I mean, we are so ashamed.
Okay.
They shout obscenity, joke, sexist jokes.
Okay.
You
Thanks,
know, even when behavior.
Okay, OP, Yusuf, you know, we take your point, and I don't see questions in the chat box, but I would like to pose, OPRF, the following questions. As I understand you, you were talking at three different levels. Mm-hmm. One, you're talking about what can be done now, or how the speaker must conduct himself, how much discretion he has, how much power he doesn't have, but you said he must be impartial. Okay, that's one level what the speaker can do, because I did ask you about the speaker being obstructionist. That's one level at which you made your point. Okay, the second level, of course, you said there must be structural changes. He must be changing the law, giving the House, greater autonomy, giving the House, not the executive, greater autonomy in the conduct of its business, etc. Structural change. And the third one is people change, the culture, quality, culture of the people, not just the people that these MPs represent, but also members of the executive and how they think about Parliament. So you at three levels, okay? You have made the point three levels. Let me take the first level, the speaker today. Okay, the speaker today. Okay, the speaker today against what he can do or what discretion he could exercise. I hope you guys can hear me. So now, is there not an avenue at present, for, as in the UK or as in Australia, for what sometimes called matters of urgent, definite, and specific public importance to be tabled, which can override the order of business? Can that not be done today?
We have a parallel provision, but perhaps I put it this way: not all things which work suitably well or very well in UK works here, or even in Australia, But having said that, yes, we have that rule, and the speaker has a lot of discretion whether he wants to, exercise the full breadth of his discretion or to hold back a bit and pander to executive wishes. But how the convention has developed is quite simple. I think it's the same in UK. When you get this motion on something which is of public importance that requires an urgent debate, you would normally ask for feedback from the relevant ministry or ministries. There is a reason for it. You got to listen to the executive too, on top of the motion. And then the speaker will have to make a call. Is it urgent enough? For instance, if some matter is being looked into already, then you can say it's not urgent. And therefore, I will not allow this motion. But if all the conditions are satisfied, then the speaker can override even the wishes of a particular minister or the ministry concerned. And that I have done.
Thank you.
Yeah, that I have done.
Thank you. Now, so there is a chink of light if the discretion was to be exercised. It is not an impossibility that discretion can be exercised, right? That is a positive answer, but a discretion. Okay? Just a couple of nights ago, the AG. The brother of the speaker. Now you're going to have two brothers blocking in the way he can make to step down is in Parliament, essentially, he said, on the floor of the House. So the AG advised the minister after the statement was made by the UMNO Supreme Council, the UMNO President, that they're withdrawing support, for the Prime Minister. So the AG advised the Prime Minister that the only way that support can be proven is on the floor of the House. Okay. This is AG's advice. Now, but the House does not mean for that confidence vote to take place. Now, what do you do in this situation? You are in locked in. Can't do anything. What would you do as Speaker in this situation?
Good pointed question. I thought long and hard on this, issue, but unfortunately, I got ousted, so there was no chance to test, my reading of the standing orders. Now, it all flows from the position of the Speaker as being the voice of the House. It is nothing more than that. It's grand sounding, Speaker, blah, 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 or President. But he is the voice of the House. That is the theory and that is the reality. So in such a situation that we are seeing now, let's suppose a vote has to be taken on the floor of the House to decide whether the current Prime Minister and Cabinet still commands a majority support of the House. If he and his Cabinet do not, then the entire Cabinet, including himself, will have to resign. The AG, by the way, in the statement does not say that the matter is to be decided on the floor of the House. And I've read through that statement. It doesn't say, a very peculiar statement. It says the party cannot speak, but the MPs should be the persons, to decide on this. But how? Is it going to be via SDs, or is it implicit? And talking about the decay, and this is one element of decay. The AG cannot purport to speak government, and he must act as an advisor. Amongst the proposals I want to make, something again that does, does not need a lot of thinking. The AG must be accountable to Parliament, and therefore he must be a member sitting in Parliament, so that people can question him, on things like this. If there is a motion of confidence or no confidence that is tabled, can the Speaker still shelter under that provision that government business must take precedence? If he shelters behind that rule, then everything comes to naught. All democratic principles are thrown to the wind. I don't believe that can be done. I don't believe that is a correct interpretation. He can, but up to a point. If there is a motion by a member whereby the House is to decide that this matter of the motion shall take precedence over ordinary government business, the Speaker will have to give that motion time. Let the entire House decide. Firstly, whether you override that requirement that government business should take precedence. If you do, then immediately the Speaker must allow that motion of no confidence. To expect the government at the current stage to provide time for the motion to be debated, I think is wishing for something that has not happened in Malaysia.
Okay, I have a rather pointed question. Whilst you're on the same point you're making, very pointed question that's been sent to me through WhatsApp. Rosita Harun asks. So there are ladies among the audience. Rosita Harun asks, why is the discretion not exercised by the Speaker? Why? What ails him? What drives him?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that because there was an aeroplane flying on top just now.
That's all. Everything is a conspiracy. Anyway, why is the discretion that the Speaker has not exercised? What drives the Speaker? What ails him? What is his motivation?
It is not a freewheeling discretion. What I'm suggesting is there must be a motion by a member of the House to override that other rule which says government business must be given precedence. Once that is passed, then the Speaker will no longer have any discretion to block. The House has spoken. So if he does that, then he will not be acting in accordance with his oath of office. Everyone takes an oath of office, Prime Minister, everyone else, Speaker likewise, to protect and defend the Constitution. Meaning to say, you've got to protect and defend parliamentary democracy. The House has spoken, you have to abide by the voice of the House.
Okay.
So that much of discretion he has, but it is not, you know, an untrammeled discretion.
Okay, thank you very much. We will come back to you, I'm sure, you know, when we finish our round of speakers. Thank you, OP Arif. And can we now move on? We've had over 10 minutes on this point. Can we now move on to the economic consequences of really of what's been happening to the country, particularly in the present pandemic and political crisis. And I would like to introduce our two economists to address a couple of questions, after which I hope there will be more questions that will be sent either directly to me by WhatsApp or posted in the chat box. Yeah, please, in the chat box. Now I would like to introduce OP Jomo, well-known economist. This question I want to put to him. In terms of economic policy and objectives, what should be done in the present circumstances? What are the quick gets that we can achieve? So, Jomo, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri, and thank you for the invitation to be here this afternoon. Allow me to make three sets of points. Firstly, I think it's very important for us to look at the larger context in which we have been operating for the last 16 months. We have failed to learn from our East Asian neighbors. Instead, we have looked west, and the result has been that we have primarily looked upon stay-in-shelter lockdowns as the main means of controlling the contagion. The second issue, which I think is very problematic, is that we do not have an all-of-government approach. This speaks to the dysfunctionality of government, which other speakers, including yourself, have alluded to. And we also do not have a whole-of-society approach. There has been a failure to educate, to inform, let alone mobilize all of society behind the current efforts. And this has been problematic. Thirdly, there has been little emphasis on finding, testing, tracing, as well as treating those who are infected. And this has compromised our ability to deal with this. So we are then presented with this false choice between so-called lives and livelihoods. And that it's our ability to cope with the situation. The second set of issues, I think, relates to the larger problem which we have in the world today. And this relates to an old discussion we had ourselves, and that relates to the whole question of intellectual property. Intellectual property is the single largest reason why we have higher costs and why we cannot do much more testing, for example, why we cannot do much more treating, why we do not have enough personal protective equipment, and so on and so forth. And this relates to the question of, enforcing so-called free trade agreements. A Trans-Pacific Partnership wanted to raise the cost of biologics and so on and so forth. And then we have the failure at the international level of the so-called COVAX arrangement, which is basically like a Dutch auction, first come, first serve. Who can pay more gets it. So when Israel pays more than the Americans, Israel gets its vaccines earlier. This is not a world which prioritizes human life. This is a world which prioritizes money. Unfortunately, this is the world which we happen to live in right now. And so we have, unfortunately, a great deal of hypocrisy in the world, capped by the recent European hypocrisy in chiding Khairi Jamaluddin, for example, for criticizing the European behavior. And this, I think, has been problematic. And this leads us to a larger issue of what we do in the world today. We have undoubtedly a new Cold War, a Cold War which is not especially ideological in the old sense, but nonetheless a Cold War. And it is in these circumstances that I think it's important for us to think very seriously about the continued relevance of having a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, of not aligning ourselves with either of the superpowers. This, I think, is fundamental for the future of developing countries, and hence gives renewed meaning to the non-aligned movement. And we have to deal with the fact that we are living in a world of a vacuum of vaccine apartheid. with all its consequences, which we need to think about. The third and last set of issues, I think, is the whole question of financing. And we are now living in a world where developing countries are going to do very badly in years to come, not only because they are not able to afford vaccines, not able to afford all the other things I talked about earlier, but also because we are trapped in a market system which condemns and constrains finance ministries from running deficits. Rich countries are running huge deficits, but nobody is saying anything about them. But we are constrained from running these deficits. It's precisely and part of the problem is exacerbated in Malaysia by the fact that you have in Malaysia people who distrust the present government for very obvious reasons. You do not have any parliamentary accountability. And if you don't have any parliamentary accountability, you do not have a public accounts committee. And so much of public expenditure is not subject to the public accounts committee. For example, we have all this so-called government guaranteed debt, which doesn't go before parliament. And this was responsible for one MDB scandal and arguably ECRL and a number of other scandals which have not been uncovered. So we have a situation where the system of governance, as you reminded us at the beginning of this session, is hugely problematic. And we are therefore, we need to really rethink policy. In the old days, people who are of Keynesian inclination would have said the government comes in as a buyer of as an employer of last resort. In the present circumstances, I do not believe that is particularly feasible. I do think that it's important to think of us as being the purchaser of last resort. In other words, the government enabling the economy to keep going by ensuring that the people have sufficient means for relief. But right now we have a situation where relief, so-called prihatin and so on, largely ignores micro enterprises, family-run enterprises, and everybody else in the formal sector. What we need going forward is not to build back better, because the status quo ante was quite rotten and has to be improved. We need to build forward better. So we need a combination right now of relief, recovery, and reform. And those reforms is precisely what Parliament has to think, seriously think about in order for us to be able to build a better society.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would suggest these points are related to points about the political economy, and how straight-jacketed, our country is in terms of access to vaccines and so on. We'll come back to the points that you have raised after I invite and after we listen to Kamal, Kamal Salih. Of course, Jomo had mentioned the fact about the deficit and how I suppose implicitly the rating agencies sort of are like the sword of Damocles, hanging over us. We have such huge deficits, whereas other countries, the developed ones, can run away, with huge deficits. So how would we then, with the fiscal deficit that we have and the high level of government debt that we have, how do we then plan our medium-term economic plans and revival? Kamal, would you address that, please, Kamal? Kamal? We can't hear you.
Okay, so yeah. Thank you very much, Munir, for introduction. Also to the organizers, KJ, for inviting me to be on the panel. I think your question, which is question number 6, in that list that you originally sent out, is a subject of a different seminar, not this seminar. You're talking about economic policy issues and so on, when in fact the topic is about parliamentary democracy. Let me just tell you that basically, if I want to answer that question directly, with one sentence, basically it's say that Parliament don't make policy; they only endorse whatever the government has put up as policy. And most policy work are being done by advisors, by the departments concerned and so on. So the debate on the budget and on other money bills in like supplementary budget and so on are essentially just to appropriate the funds, because the law, the constitution requires that the parliament must endorse the money bill. And in fact, the money bill also has a role in terms of dismissing government. If the government cannot pass a money bill, budget or supplement budget or anything like that, it doesn't have to be a vote of no confidence in order to dismiss a government. And I think a government falls not necessarily on the floor of the parliament. I think Arif mentioned earlier. Government will fall regardless. If, for instance, there's no more majority support from the knowledge that we have outside in the what we call in the media, for instance. So the basic question is actually the workings of the parliamentary system in the context of party politics and the various constitutional requirements of the three branches and the separation of powers. And of course, the very important role of the fourth estate. When I was an MP, I did raise the question whether, we should create, we should reactivate those select committee system, and also use, at that time, it was very early stage, about 1996 and so on. The internet was not, and social media is not so prevalent as now or as influential. But I raised the question of cyber politics. I did raise the question of what is the impact of the internet on the workings of politics, and in this case, the various branches of government as well. So then at that time, the party position, which at that time was articulated through JJ, Arwah JJ, Jamaluddin Jarjis. He was the chairman of the Backbenchers Club. So this question was raised at the Backbenchers Club. And I was trying to push for maybe such a seminar like now you are having among parliamentarians to deal with issues of education policy, economic policy, human rights, and so on, foreign policy and so on. But there was no ear for this kind of things. That means Parliament does not make policy. It either endorse, or if it is a good institution where the separation of powers are strong and adhered to, and everybody understands, including all the KPIs. For instance, what Yusuf said about the MPs to reflect questions and debates in the Dewan from the requirements or the needs and the problems of dia punya constituency. Surely it is in fact a requirement of a representative, but it doesn't work. It will not work if you have the KPI. Who is going to enforce it? Who is going to manage it, and so on? It is up basically to the Wakil Rakyat himself to take the initiative to establish that. If I have the internet as it is now, I would have created it. I in fact wanted to have a community newspaper at that time, and later many constituencies follow that. And I had a bus, of an internet bus, for people to use it if they want to, if they don't have their own computer. But probably, even with the equipment and the measures you have, the facilities, in the end, it is the attitude of and the requirements of a Wakil Rakyat. Nobody, the Wakil Rakyat is only evaluated both by the leaders of the party or by the people, but only every 5 years. A real democracy must rely also on in between the elections. What processes you have in between? And the committee meetings is one of them. The one that is really effective, but even then can be manipulated, is the Public Accounts Committee and the Discipline Committee, perhaps, the Privileges Committee. But other than that, all the other committees are non-existent. I think Arif tried to introduce that reform under the PH government at that time to introduce, Anwar said, we must have a very functioning committee. I think for the system to work, one, of course, there must be proper separation of powers. Everybody knows the KPIs and what the requirements are and what the constitution is. It must be also, to me, the committee system is very important. Why Australia, UK, and so on that practices the same system works is because the select committees work. I don't know whether you agree. If you can improve the committee system, right now, even the declaration by the Majlis Raja on the 16th of June says that the committee work must go on, because that is where the detailed aspects of policy can be discussed. When you get the big Dewan and every parliamentarian speaks up, the person who is very good in rhetoric, is a good orator, good joker, make the people laugh, and so on, gets the bulk of the attention.
Okay, thank you.
You don't.
Thank you, Kamal. If I may begin the discussion stage by asking you, asking you directly, whilst sort of Parliament does not construct or make policy, economic policy, it has a very fundamental role in ensuring there is accountability in the implementation of policy, that there are no leakages in monies and other things, in implementation of policy. So if Parliament is weak, on the one hand, it has no participation in making policy, which it should also, you have suggested ways that it could, but its fundamental role is accountability in implementation of policy. How could that be improved?
I agree. That I agree completely. It is true that the Parliament is the body that is responsible for accountability and the use of public money, the tax system, and so on. Given that as it may, why doesn't it play the role of ensuring IMDb doesn't occur, corruption doesn't occur? Public Accounts Committee is actually only public accountability in name, but it doesn't have the same power to really bring ministers and officers, public officers, to book. Why? Even you can manipulate the report of the Public Accounts Committee. It's controlled by the ruling party. At least one, the chairman and the majority is the ruling party. So the reason why the whole system, not just the PAC, the parliament, the courts, the separation of powers fail, is because the executive has arrogated so much power, centralized so much power. Even when Arif wants to call for special meeting of parliament, he has to go and get the advice. He cannot decide by himself. I think he will have to go to the Prime Minister and ask for some feedback. And the Prime Minister will say to the KSN, pass this message to the Speaker. The reality is such that, I know I was there, but only for some time. But I have seen the workings, and I've been involved in policy making for 45 years. And I've seen for 60 years how our system has failed and reached this state. The aggregation of and centralization of power and the bureaucratization of everything by the PGD. I'm sorry, KJ. The fact that the universities are now in a mess is because you want to make the universities as part of another department of government. I can actually go into that debate. That is the issue of universities as against the Dewan Rakyat. But the issue is the same, that there is overpowering power, I would say, in the hands of the Prime Minister. And that's why politics is important. That's why being a politician, being a Prime Minister is so crucial. And that's why...
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, again, we come back to this issue of the separation of powers, the fundamental importance of the separation of powers, and the importance of executive steel, and executive steel of the powers of the parliament. And they're not likely to want to give it back when, they are in the driving seat. And there's a question here, which perhaps I could put to Jomo, a question from Rajiv Anandan. Now, with they're sitting in the driver's seat, why should there be any kind of political will to make any kind of change? When we have been, what should they want to change it? So how do we make sure the political will is there, Jomo, if I may ask? Hello, Jomo.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I don't have any easy answers to that question, as important as it is. But I think it's important for us to recognize that insofar as this government still claims a parliamentary majority and still claims the support of the public, it still seeks legitimacy on the basis of an ostensible parliamentary majority. And it's therefore sensitive to how public policy is perceived. Otherwise, there wouldn't be all this effort of trying to improve the perceptions of public policy. A lot of the criticisms which many of us have made over the last 16 months or so, some of them have been taken on board, or at least gestures have been made to give the impression that they are being taken on board. So I do think that we are in a situation where these kinds of things still do matter, that somebody will report on our discussions today, and maybe one or two things might be taken away, perhaps what Tan Sri Arif said or what you said, Chairman. But whatever it is, there is still some sensitivity. Without any kind of parliamentary accountability, as gerrymandered as this parliament is, as unaccountable as Yusuf reminded us it is, and so on and so forth. I have to disagree with Senator Yaacob in comparing parliament to the Pasar Malam. He's doing a disservice to the Pasar Malam, where there are at least some rules, there is some basic market morality, if you will. But we live in a situation where, unfortunately, rules are being made, and there is a certain morality. And when you have members of parliament all being either part of the huge executive, which is largely dysfunctional, or kept on side by given executive positions as chairs of GLCs and so on and so forth, you obviously have a major problem. A major problem in the sense that you have very distorted incentives. Just like, for example, if you think about the situation now, big pharmaceutical companies have no incentive to get rid of COVID-19 forever, because their business plans are now predicated on the continued sales of boosters. So we will have a booster for the Delta variant and yet another booster for something else. So we have to look at the whole question of incentives and aligning incentives to ensure the desirable outcomes, which several of the speakers have already alluded to. This is the situation which we have, and we need to think very, very, very seriously system economically without the necessary legal as well as other reforms. And that's why this session is useful and relevant.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jomo. Current issue. Azra Banu, in fact, has raised it. and this is quite an important reflection I would like you to share with us. Now, what are your thoughts on the recent Bloomberg article on Malaysia, that it is a failed state? All right, Malaysia is a failed state, and both of you, of course, it may seem like a political question. The issue of, some people have said it's not a failed state, to draw the distinction, but some may say it is becoming a near failed state because of the incapacitation of its economy and finances. So there is an economic relationship, in that question. So, taking just perhaps both prongs, but if you like, Jomo, you first, taking just the economic prong of a failed state description. Please, Jomo.
Yes, I think I've made a lot of criticisms of the present government, and these are all quite well known. And as you remember, Tan Sri Munir, my last fight, and the only one which I ever had some success with, was actually to get funding to deal with COVID-19 on the 10th of February last year. Now, the fact of the matter is that this government has done poorly for all kinds of reasons. And we all know that. But at the same time, I think to imply that it is a failed state in the sense of some other states in the world, it's a bit of hyperbole, which I can understand editors and journalists indulging in. But I don't take foreign journalists very seriously. I know when I write, to attract the attention of the reader, I sometimes use fairly strong language. I have referred to the situation in the world today as one of not only vaccine apartheid, but even vaccine genocide. And I challenge the IP association in this country to sue me if they want to. And I've been sued, as you know, for several times, and I've prevailed each time. But I think it's very important for us to recognize that a little bit of hyperbole is often necessary in politics and so on and so forth. But I think as a serious analysis, this state, there are many things which are still going reasonably. If you think about the vaccination process, many people would actually say that, given all the circumstances, the failure of the vaccine companies to deliver as scheduled, we haven't done too badly. I think we are paying far too much and so on and so forth. And I still have a lot of criticisms, but I would say that it's not a failed state in that total sense, as implied. There are many aspects of governance which have failed. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Jomo. Thank you very much. Let me put it to OP Kamal with perhaps an emphasis on the fact that our finances, our debt levels, government ceiling, for debt, is that going to cause us to become a failed state in terms of economic governance because of the pressure of the rating agencies and cost of finance, cost of borrowing, and the lack of revenue, on the other hand, because of the downturn in the economy. Now, are we caught in some kind of trap which will lead us towards becoming a failed state economically?
If a state would have failed economically if all those factors and so on, the indicators, economic indicators, and on growth rate, unemployment, inflation, debt, everything, all. But according to the stats department, some of these indicators, even over the last month, unemployment have been reduced by 10,000 new jobs were created between this month and last month, or last month and the previous month. So the question is, we are in fact recovering, at least from the last wave we thought we were recovering, but now we are delayed because of the new surge. So there are danger signs. If we are talking about fiscal capacity, the issue of debt, which was discussed to death by various quarters is actually a non-issue. You can be earning, you can be borrowing more than 100 times the GDP. We still survive simply because Singapore does is 200. The issue is not so much the level or the ratio or the debt to GDP, but your ability to pay your debt. And that for Malaysia is still quite a high ranking, a highly ranked attribute. And so in other words, we can raise our debt level beyond the 55% or even the 65% now. It can go on to 80. Some people are saying it's already 80%. So it doesn't matter. We know that we are able to export and earn enough later to pay for these salaries, this debt. Countries like Ireland grew out of a debt structure that is much bigger than ours. What we don't want to do is go all the way to what Iceland did, for instance, and bankrupted its own country. But we have lost. The reason why it is now raised to about 65%, let's say, by Parliament as the statutory limit is just a measure of our prudency level. We think that we may not be able to allocate all our export income and our output for the year to service the debt, but the debt is now well below 10% and so on. It is also time to go. I'm a Keynesian, so priming is very important too, and we don't need to spend to get out of the present mess. And we need to think of the long term. Got to go beyond Keynesian also. But basically, is that just one investors are confident about the stability, the direction, the future, and so on. We have now, if we have announced all of that through the SPD 2030 and so on, and still people don't believe you because of your actions, because of your flip-flop, because of the fact that things are not so stable as they are. And that's why foreigners are moving to Indonesia and to Singapore, even though they're already in Malaysia and knowing that Malaysia has always been a very stable government. So it is in that sense, the whole system that has to come together. It is an all-nation approach, not just
thank you, Kamal. Very, very salient point indeed. We may have capacity to pay, and that is critical, but that capacity may be eroded if confidence starts to shift and move away, and that confidence is not going to come back until we have a stable government, with continuity of policy and so on and so forth. And so we won't, be having that drift that Vietnam is gaining, Indonesia is gaining, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you both, Jomo and Kamal. And let's go to the question finally that will touch upon the Constitution, the position in the Constitution, and of course reflection on the constitutional monarchy system in our parliamentary democracy. So could I ask GK Ganesan, now with all the stress we have been experiencing, has the Constitution been twisted beyond its breaking point? GK, please come in.
Tan Sri, can you hear me, friends? I do not think I can do justice to this subject within 5 minutes, but I will try with an example. A man went to a doctor and said, when I lift my arm like that, it hurts. And the doctor said, stop lifting the arm like that. La. So if you ask me for a solution, how to solve this problem with our Constitution, my answer is very simple. Follow the Constitution. If you want to play hockey, don't play rugby. But our Constitution has been used as a butcher's table, Let me give you a few examples. There is no rule of law in the country at the current moment. There's no rule of law in the country because there's no reverence to the constitution. Let me give you a few examples very, very quickly. I'm watching my time. Number one, the formation of the government has been shrouded in mystery. His Majesty the King should have released the number of people who supported Tan Sri Maidin when the appointment was made. What's wrong with that? I think from now on, every time somebody goes to the King and says, make me Prime Minister, and His Majesty says, okay, His Majesty must in fact publish that list so that it can be tested in public. The second thing is there is no evidence of majority to this day. One of our speakers, XYB, told us that the test of the budget is the test of the Prime Minister's confidence. So I ask you now, when budget was passed in May of 2020, what was the number of votes he got? 111. Is there a majority? There are two decisions, unfortunately, in the Supreme Courts of Africa that say majority means half plus one. So he didn't even have 112 votes. We had 108 votes against. We had Tengku Razali who had gone away for no reason that we can fathom. And then two people had died. And guess what? The emergency law doesn't allow these two vacancies to be filled. Whereas in Sabah, they went and filled it. So when they feel like it, they fill it. When they don't feel like it, they close the door. And then we have a cabinet that is so large, it's 15 football teams put together. A cabinet is supposed to fit within a kitchen. We all understand this, right? Then we have no succession plan for the Prime Minister who is not doing well. Next, we have the emergency, which was unconstitutional. When can the emergency be appointed? There is a threat to three things: security of the nation, the economic life of the nation, the public order of the nation. Have you got a problem with the economy? Answer yes. That's not because of COVID. It's because of bad management. You can't have an emergency every time somebody screws up the economy, you know. You just repair the economy. Next thing is the Emergency Essential Ordinance 2021 is unconstitutional. Why is that? Well, for a start, the right to elections every 5 years, remember this, very few people, including 22,000 lawyers we have at the bar, I ask them the question, they cannot answer this question. How many times do you have to have an election? Once in 5 years. Okay, how long is this emergency? 6 months. Then answer me, why did this emergency remove the law that says there must be election every 5 years? You're asking me whether my gun got bullets, you know. I'm standing there in the middle of 300 craters. I don't know where to go. Why would you take a 6-month emergency and remove election every 5 years? Does it not mean that you want to stop elections? You could have said, if you look at the 1969 emergency ordinance, you remember May 30? That emergency said, an election shall be called at the discretion of His Majesty the King. How come our emergency is different? Then the calling of Parliament completely taken off. It doesn't say Parliament shall be called at the time His Majesty. It says all laws in relation to Article 55 are of no effect. Article 55 tells you when to call the Parliament and when to dissolve it. All right. Then extra powers granted to those in control. The 1969 emergency ordinance, which is supposed to be the example that we all follow, doesn't give any such additional powers. Then using emergency ordinance to create laws in areas where there are already ready-made laws. Prevention and Control of Infectious Diseases Act says if you want to go and take over a public hospital, you can, but you must give reasonable compensation. We have the same thing in the emergency ordinance repeated. Can take over, anybody who questions it will be fined 5 million and imprisoned, and don't have to, you know, there's no mention of market rate. Why do that? Then the power, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, under the emergency regulations, our medical affairs are now being not run by the Ministry of Health. 5 minutes past, you know, Tan Sri, stop me whenever you can. For our Ministry of Health areas of science is running it. I have no idea why this is happening. Our civil servants have become Persian carpets, you know, nice to walk on. They won't talk back to you. And then the powers of the speaker are not being exercised. The what little remaining discretion in favor of parliament can be used, in favor of this separation of powers can be used, are not being used. Our speaker has the gall to tell us it actually depends on the deputy minister, He has to decide when to call. Since when, Charles II used to call and dispense with parliament every time he felt like it. Every time somebody was going to vote against his motion for levying extra money because he wanted to marry a queen back there in France, the parliament fellows refused. So he knows they're going to refuse. He will just dissolve parliament. He will change the speaker when he feels like it. They cut off his neck. That's when they had the 1608, all these other acts, which we still follow in Malaysia. Next, our MPs have no idea what is the meaning of the word separation of powers. You're asking what's the meaning of separation of powers, you look at you. Engkau jangan cakap banyak. Engkau ikut kerajaan. Ya, faham. Engkau jangan soal. Jangan jawab. So this is what we have. And then the Essential Powers Self-Quarantine PUA 46 of 2021. I'm citing this because I want someone to pick me up. Ministers are excused from COVID-19 self-quarantine. Apa? The vaccine cannot recognize, sort of passes over the ministers, is it? All right. Next, we have this question that we have been spoken to about the Senate. The Senate is for those who have rendered distinguished public service or those who have achieved distinction in A, public service, B, profession, C, commerce, D, industry, E, agriculture, F, cultural issues, G, social service, or representatives of racial minorities. Today, the Senate is the back door to the cabinet. So what we now have, people are asking me, what's your solution? The answer is there must be constitutional instruction for children from a very young age. Those who want to go and stand for election must have and undergo a 2-week course in constitutional papers. They must pass it, and then only they can go and nominate themselves as candidates in an election. Then O.P. Hashim was speaking about racial parties. The constitution bans anything racial, but guess what? We have legalized racial parties. All right. Next, the real problem is every once in 5 years, our rakyat sharpen their index finger, they come, they stick it into some ink, and then they go and sleep. And then they will bitch. This one not right. That one not right. Ini tak ada. Itu tak ada. Masjid tak buka. Tempat sembahyang tak buka. Koil tak buka. Church tak buka. You never engage. You refuse to engage. You refuse to organize yourself into groups and ask questions. You refuse to pose questions. And then you want everybody to understand you. We only have political pressure. The moment there was a mention that Tan Sri Maidin doesn't have confidence, one guy comes out and says, 400. Where did this guy come from? Pressure which the government actually inculcates. Then the next question is, should the speaker be given greater power? My answer is yes. Should the AG be an MP? Answer yes. But why is our system like that? Even the British Parliament has gone and improved their rules. We haven't improved. We are still stuck in that, what they call them? Imperial Parliament that Britain had in 1946. We are following their rules, whereas India, New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, well, Singapore, or United States, they've all gone forward and they made the role of the speaker very, very strong. When a guy gets married, on the first night, he goes and sleeps with his neighbor's wife, and you ask him, hey, what happened when you came to masjid? You put up your hand and you swore in the name of God. If you're a Hindu, you swore in the name of your gods and you walked around the fire. If you're a Christian, you swore in the name of the Bible to give utter fidelity and loyalty and all the rest of it until the death do us apart. Itu tak apa tu, no need to follow lah. He doesn't understand. So therefore, what I'm saying is our MPs are not functioning as MPs. Tun Razak and Tun Mahathir built a fortress that nobody could get in. They threw away the key in a river, and even Tun Mahathir can't get in. With those words, I stop. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, JK. I gave you a bit more time because they were supposed to have 2 speakers in your segment, and one didn't. So we could accommodate the extra bit about the points that you have made, and there are questions that are coming in specifically for you, GK.
Yes.
Okay. Now, one is a question which you mentioned, the British historical experiences and so on and so forth. Now, the question that's being asked, and this comes up now and again, is a Westminster model system relevant to Malaysia? I mean, this is a huge question, right? You want to change the system of government, or you want to follow the system that you have? But they say, is it a system that we should have? Is it relevant to Malaysia?
I have three answers. The first answer is the proposition, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Can you tell me something better than the Westminster system? If you can, I will listen to you. Maybe the Chinese party system, where you build a body of cadres from the ground up. It amounts to 20,000 people at the end of the day, from whom they select about 500. The 500 is then reduced to 300. 300 is then reduced to 100. 100 is then reduced to 50. And then they function as the cabinet, some sort of a merit-based system that will not work in Malaysia for many reasons, one being the racial divide. But the reality of the matter is this: when we have to play football, we need a flat, equal playing field. We cannot have the field tilted to one side. So what we are doing is our MPs are using Parliament as the canteen. Masuk, tunjuk muka, at least OP Arif used to be a bit more formal, and there was a level of aristocracy to the way he spoke. But there was a speaker before him. He will say, teluk intan, teluk intan, teluk intan, teluk intan. He'll repeat this for 15 minutes. I was wondering, what the heck are you doing? Just ban him lah. And then, in England, one guy, John Burkow, was on the seat. John Burkow was the speaker for 10 years. He was on the seat, and somebody said, I think the Prime Minister did not tell the truth. I think he's a liar. And John Burkow jumped up and said, I ask you, sir, to withdraw and reconsider it, restructure your sentence. I repeat, I do not care what the chair will do. I think the Prime Minister is a liar. I warn you again, sir. Sir, I think the Prime Minister is a liar. You are to leave this house now. No talk. All of 30 seconds. Now, OP Arif didn't do that, but there were many occasions that OP Arif came very near doing that. You see his face, you can say, I've been working as a lawyer and I used to appear before him. He's a very calm fellow, but you can see from his face that he's controlling himself. On many occasions, he came near to exploding, but we need to have really good speakers who understand the law, who know what the limitations of the rules are, but they can, it can work.
Right.
We are not using it well. Next question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's a kind of a Churchillian answer insofar as, the democracy and parliamentary democracy is concerned. Show me another system, tell me it can work, and then, let's talk about it. But I have, before we go into the general discussion, one last question. And we, throughout this forum, been reflecting how useless most of our MPs are. They don't even understand the Constitution. They don't understand what separation of powers means. They do not actually conduct themselves as responsible MPs in the governance of the country. They're part of the governance structure. Now, the question I ask is then, is it not ironic that it should take the Agong and the Malay rulers to come up with the 16th June statement to remind us that we are a parliamentary democracy, and there must be parliament convened, ending of the emergency, which you said was in any case unconstitutional, but never mind that it should take the Malay rulers and the Agong to do so, and in doing so, how close do they come to exceeding, their powers or authority under the Constitution? This thing has been much discussed, and I would draw your attention, I'm sure you saw it, to the last paragraph of the Malay rulers' media statement, the last paragraph, in which they said they're not interested in going beyond their powers as constitutional monarchs, and that they recognized parliamentary democracy in Malaysia as being the fundamental system. Now, is it not ironic that the rulers should be the readers of the constitution, that they do not put it on the butcher's table, as you said at the start, GK?
This is a very difficult question which has got many different answers. The most important of which is whether I'll find myself in prison in about 10 seconds. But let's be honest with each other, and I'm sure His Majesty, the King, is listening to us even as we speak. If not, it'll be reported to him. So I'm going to be very clear about this. Article 39 says the executive authority, executive means Bakerja administration. The executive authority of the Federation shall be vested in the Yang di-Pertuan Agong and exercisable by him or through the cabinet. So there's that. So we understand that the king is not a person who runs the government, but the king is the ceremonial head. So it's quite right for the rulers' council to say, look, we can't step into the dust of battle because we are not allowed to do that. The constitution doesn't allow us, because there will be complaints that we as rulers are using our powers to misalign democracy. And I think that's a legitimate concern. The second question I want to ask is, for the most part, have our rulers behaved like Queen Elizabeth II or her father, the Georges, in the way they've conducted themselves vis-a-vis the constitution? A very difficult answer is mostly yes. There have been occasional issues of difficulties, but if you were to study very, very carefully the history of the monarchy and democracy in England, you will only see that they settled down in the last 300 years. So really, our monarchs are learning new things as they can see here. In the UMNO-led Barisan National Coalition for 62 years, most of these problems didn't arise and they didn't have to deal with it. The second thing that one must remember is, who is advising them legally? Somebody from the AG's department, because the constitution says that. The AG also advises the government. When Tommy Thomas became the AG, he said that the AG must be separate from the person who advises the king. Either the AG advises the king or the AG advises the government. The proposition that leads to is the assumption that the king has some executorial powers by which he needs a separate set of legal advice in order to rule against the government. I am not sure that's not right. I am also not sure that I am right. I do realize it's a very gray area, but I do think that the king must be advised by a group of legal advisors who are independently chosen every 5 years, who have deep knowledge of the constitution, and academicians who deal with that subject, ex-judges and so forth. The third thing that I would like to understand, I would like friends to understand is, in the last 24 to 36 months, our country has gone through a constitutional turmoil, the likes of which we have never legally confronted before in this country, except once. From 1969 all the way to 1972, when there was in my opinion, respectful opinion, a declaration of emergency, which was completely unnecessary because it was more a political move than a proper constitutional move. I've explained this in a series of
ways. Yeah, I'm sorry, we are running out of time, but these are sort of very, very important issues, and we are coming to the end, despite the fact that I said we might get about 30 minutes discussion, and the Q&A has gone back and forth, and we have not been able to get that much discussion. There were lots of questions, and including a comment that just came in from Abdul Aziz Abdullah, coming back to us OPs, in particular, but the public at large. We must be vocal. We must take our point of view. We should not be cowed, and we should relate our experience, of ethnic mixing, religious mixing, and be more activist And this actually relates back to Yusuf's point. We all we all are accountable too. We must begin, if it's not too late, to play this role. And I have some final comments to make to wind up our discussion today. But before that, I'll quickly ask Tawfik to say a few quick words if he wants towards the end. Tawfik.
Hi. First of all, I think our country needs to have a complete understanding that the Constitution is what is the basis of our existence. And I had my own experience in fighting for the Constitution when I had to oppose RUU 355 a few years ago, where the role of the speaker was called into question, and also whether or not the current Minister of Law understood what the Constitution was when he seconded the motion by Hadi in Parliament. The standing orders were thrown out, and so was the Constitution ignored because the rulers were not consulted before the motion was tabled. And I think this brings up the question of what kind of a nation we are. First of all, I think we are well represented at many levels. We've talked about Parliament as an institution, but we haven't really discussed what each state assembly's role is when it comes to the voters. And I think we need to look very closely at the federal system and find out whether or not we can improve on it. Because in the selection of MPs is one aspect a lot of people. There's also the question of when's the state which is to cater to the needs of our brethren in East Malaysia, in Sabah and Sarawak. Sorry, I was saying that we need to look very closely at the role of the states and also how the states function in relation to our brethren in East Malaysia, because in our discussion so far, we've talked about federal problems, but we have not really gone down to the basic problems of how the states are governed and what it means for the greater federation. That's as much as I can say at this time because of the time constraint. Over back to you, Munir.
Please unmute. Please unmute.
There was a comment right at the very end of our discussion just now from the chat box that there should be direct council elections. So there is a moving up from the very base of our society, or very base of our electoral system. But in the interest of time, we cannot discuss that. But I think Tawfik's point about making sure that we reach out to everyone at every level is noted. Now, I wish to end very quickly, and I think the points that were made by Yusuf are very important in terms of immediate action step that should be taken to ensure accountability of MPs in the exercise of their responsibilities. But what we have not discussed is what should we do now beyond that, whether we should have a unity government, which I hold strongly that we should have. We have all of government, all of society, and a government which is not all of politicians cannot call all of the country to support it, because you must get everybody together. If you're not doing it at the governmental level, how do you expect the people to do it at the people level? So a unity government, and perhaps there have to be participation with council of advisors, and of course, Parliament must be convened immediately and revived as far as we can immediately. But the main point, I think, would be Yusuf's point about direct action. And then we must not forget the structural problems that we face, which this current issues only reflect. You can say it began in 1969. Post 69, you could say it got worse post 1981. And we have what we call, corruption on top of the economic policies post 69, the race issues that came to become central in our system, and the religious issues that got injected, particularly post 1981. So we erred, ERR. We have to look at our ERR. And then encapsulating this whole ERR is corruption. And people think of corruption just as money, finance. No, corruption fundamentally is of the soul and the mind. And if you are corrupted in the soul and the mind, institutions get corrupted, monies get leaked, and so on and so forth. So there is a need for structural change for the medium to long term, quite apart from the immediate steps. Let me end, therefore, by thanking everyone who has participated in this, particularly the speakers, for sharing with us their thoughts about the issues facing this country, particularly in relation to the question that was asked, whether the parliamentary system and constitutional monarchy. We have run out of time. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and have a good evening. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Many thanks, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.